Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Nikki faints in divorce court. Victor presents shocking evidence. The young and the restless unfolds in a breathtaking, pulse-pounding cascade of betrayal, devotion, power, and heartbreak as the walls of the Genoa City courthouse seem to close in on the most infamous couple in town, because what begins as a cold, procedural divorce hearing between Victor Newman and Nikki Newman explodes into a scandal so explosive that it leaves the gallery gasping, the lawyers scrambling, and Nikki collapsing to the marble floor in a moment no one will ever forget. And from the instant Nikki steps into the courtroom, elegant yet visibly fragile, her hands trembling as she clutches her purse, her eyes betraying weeks of sleepless nights, the tension is suffocating, as if every soul present senses that this is not merely the end of a marriage, but the reckoning of a lifetime. With Victor seated across from her, stoic and unreadable, the legendary mustache unmoving, his gaze sharp and calculating, giving nothing away, while whispers ripple through the room about rumors of secret accounts, hidden alliances, and a mystery USB drive that vanished weeks earlier, and Nikki steels herself, determined to reclaim her dignity after decades of loving a man capable of breathtaking devotion and unspeakable cruelty. Yet the moment the judge calls the case to order, Victor's attorney stands and calmly announces that the defense wishes to submit new evidence. Evidence that directly contradicts Nikki's claims of emotional abuse, financial manipulation, and coercion, causing Nikki's breath to hitch, because she knows Victor never plays his hand unless he is certain of victory, and as the judge reluctantly allows it, Victor himself rises, his voice low but commanding, and begins to speak not as a husband but as a titan fighting for legacy, revealing that he has in his possession a series of documents, recordings, and financial records proving that Nikki knowingly participated in decisions she now condemns, that she signed off on transfers, attended secret meetings, and even benefited from actions she publicly denounced. And with each revelation the room grows colder as Victor presents a timeline showing Nikki's signature on shell accounts tied to Newman Enterprises, video footage from a private security camera showing Nikki entering a discreet office late at night with an associate she swore she had cut ties with, and audio recordings, grainy yet unmistakable, of Nikki's voice expressing calculated consent to a ruthless corporate maneuver that destroyed lives, and Nikki's face drains of color as her attorney objects frantically, claiming manipulation and context distortion, but the judge orders the evidence admitted pending review, and Victor's eyes finally soften, not with mercy, but with devastating honesty, as he declares that he loved Nikki fiercely, that he would have given her everything, but that he will not allow her to rewrite history to paint herself as a victim while crucifying him alone. And it is at that moment that Nikki's strength finally fractures, because buried beneath Victor's brutal presentation is something far more shocking, a final document, a handwritten letter from years ago, produced from a sealed safety deposit box, in which Nikki herself outlines a contingency plan in case Victor ever became too dangerous, a plan involving secret leverage, hidden assets, and alliances with his enemies, written in Nikki's own hand, signed and dated, never meant to be seen, and as the letter is read aloud, Nikki staggers to her feet, her vision blurring, the courtroom spinning as the weight of her own past crashes down upon her, memories flooding back of nights filled with fear and resolve, of promises she made to herself to survive Victor at any cost, and the murmurs in the courtroom swell into a roar as everyone realizes this is not a simple divorce, but mutual assured destruction, and Nikki opens her mouth to speak, to explain, to scream that context matters, that love can drive good people to desperate acts. But the words never come because her knees buckle and she collapses, the sound of her body hitting the floor echoing like a gunshot, sending Victor lunging forward despite himself as chaos erupts, medics rushing in, the judge shouting for order, while Victor kneels beside Nikki, his face a battlefield of rage, regret, and terror as he calls her name, gripping her hand as if all the power in the world cannot save him from losing the one woman who ever truly mattered. And as Nikki is rushed out on a stretcher, unconscious and pale, the court adjourns amid stunned silence, leaving behind questions that will haunt Genoa City for years. Was Victor's evidence an act of justice or revenge? Did Nikki's secret plans make her a survivor or a conspirator? And when Nikki awakens, will this moment destroy her forever or finally free her from the man she loves and fears in equal measure? Because in Genoa City, love is never simple, truth is never clean, and the most shocking betrayals are often born from the deepest devotion. The fallout from Nikki's collapse in the courtroom does not end when the gavel slams or when the doors swing shut behind the paramedics. Instead, it ripples outward through Genoa City like a seismic aftershock, exposing fractures in relationships, loyalties, and truths that had been buried for decades. Because as Nikki is rushed to Memorial Hospital, her fragile form dwarfed by the stretcher and the harsh fluorescent lights, Victor remains frozen in the corridor outside the courtroom, his hand still curled as if it were holding hers, his expression hollowed out by the realization that no matter how carefully he planned his move, no matter how justified he believed himself to be, the sight of Nikki collapsing because of him is a wound that power, money, and vengeance cannot heal. And as reporters swarm the courthouse steps screaming questions about secret letters, financial conspiracies, and whether Victor Newman deliberately destroyed his wife in public, Victor says nothing, his silence louder than any denial, because for the first time in years he is not thinking like a mogul or a strategist, but like a man who may have just lost the love of his life forever. At the hospital, the tension is unbearable as Nikki is wheeled into the emergency room, doctors barking orders while Nick, Victoria, and Adam arrive within minutes of each other, united by fear but instantly divided by blame, because Nick's fury ignites the moment he learns what happened in that courtroom, his voice shaking as he demands to know how Victor could unleash something so devastating without considering Nikki's fragile health, while Victoria, torn between loyalty to her father and deep concern for her mother, tries to maintain control, insisting they wait for medical updates before tearing each other apart, and Adam, standing slightly apart as always, watches Victor with narrowed eyes, recognizing the familiar pattern of destruction disguised as necessity, wondering if this time Victor has finally crossed a line he cannot come back from. When the doctor finally emerges and announces that Nikki fainted due to a severe spike in blood pressure compounded by stress, dehydration, and emotional shock, relief washes through the family, but it is thin and fragile because the doctor's warning is unmistakable. Another episode like this could be catastrophic, and Nikki must be protected from further trauma, words that land like a verdict against Victor, who nods silently, absorbing the blame even as he insists to himself that the truth needed to come out, that Nikki forced his hand, that he could not allow himself to be painted as a monster while she walked away untouched. Yet those justifications crumble the moment he is allowed into Nikki's room and sees her lying unconscious, her face pale and vulnerable, so unlike the fierce woman who stood across from him in court only hours earlier. As Nikki slowly regains consciousness, fragments of the courtroom flood back. Victor's voice, the letter, the whispers, the humiliation, and tears slip from the corners of her eyes before she even opens them, because fainting did not erase the truth that was dragged into the light, and when she finally focuses on Victor standing beside her bed, their eyes meet in a moment so charged that it feels as though the room itself holds its breath. And Nikki's first words are not anger or accusation but a hoarse whisper asking, "Was it worth it?" A question that cuts Victor deeper than any legal defeat ever could, because for all his power, he has no answer that does not sound hollow, and he realizes with crushing clarity that winning the case may cost him Nikki forever. Meanwhile, the legal storm intensifies outside the hospital walls, because Nikki's attorney files an emergency motion to suspend the divorce proceedings on medical grounds, framing Victor's evidence presentation as deliberate emotional harm, while Victor's legal team counters that the evidence was legally obtained and necessary to establish truth, turning Nikki's collapse into yet another battlefield in a war where every move is scrutinized, twisted, and weaponized. And as leaks begin to surface to the press, partial transcripts of the letter, blurred screenshots of financial records, unnamed sources claiming Nikki orchestrated shadow alliances, the court of public opinion turns vicious, with some portraying Nikki as a long-suffering victim finally pushed too far, and others branding her a master manipulator exposed at last, leaving Nikki trapped not only in a hospital bed, but in a narrative she no longer controls. Inside Nikki's room, emotions erupt when Nick confronts Victor, his voice cracking as he accuses his father of trying to destroy Nikki simply to protect his ego, while Victor fires back that Nikki chose this path when she decided to turn him into a villain in open court, and Victoria steps between them, demanding they stop because Nikki's heart cannot withstand their endless war. A plea that momentarily silences the room and forces Victor to confront a truth he has long avoided, that his children are exhausted by the endless cycle of loyalty tests and collateral damage that define life as a Newman. As the night deepens, Nikki asks to be alone with Victoria, and in that quiet, dimly lit room, mother and daughter share a raw conversation that peels back years of silence, as Nikki admits that the letter Victor revealed was written during one of the darkest periods of her life, when she truly believed Victor's ambition would destroy everyone around him. And she felt she had to create an escape hatch not just for herself, but for her children, confessing that while she never intended to use it, she also could not bring herself to destroy it, because it represented her last shred of control in a marriage where love and fear were constantly intertwined, and Victoria listens, torn between empathy and disappointment, realizing that both of her parents are guilty of the same sin, believing that secrecy and power could protect their family when all it did was poison it. The next day brings another shock when Nikki, still weak but resolute, makes a decision that stuns everyone. She instructs her attorney to resume the divorce proceedings as soon as medically possible, refusing to let her collapse be used as a weapon or a delay tactic, declaring that she will not allow Victor to define her story or silence her truth. And when Victor learns of this, his reaction is a volatile mix of admiration and dread, because he recognizes the steel beneath Nikki's fragility, the same strength that first drew him to her, and he knows that if Nikki returns to that courtroom, she will not do so as a victim but as a woman ready to burn everything down to reclaim herself. As preparations resume, new revelations surface that threaten to upend Victor's sense of control, because Jack Abbott, ever watchful, begins to dig into the origins of the evidence Victor presented, suspecting that some of it may have been selectively curated to maximize damage, and when whispers emerge that a key recording was edited and a financial document lacks a crucial page, the possibility arises that Victor's truth may be more manipulation than justice, opening the door for Nikki to turn the tables completely. And when Victor confronts his legal team about these concerns, their evasiveness confirms his worst fear, that in his obsession to win, lines may have been crossed that could destroy him legally and morally. The day Nikki returns to court, supported by her children and walking slowly but proudly into the room, the atmosphere is electric, because this is no longer just a divorce hearing but a reckoning for two of Genoa City's most powerful figures. And as Nikki takes the stand, her voice steady despite the pain etched into her features, she delivers a testimony that stuns everyone, acknowledging her past decisions without excuses, admitting that fear and love drove her to prepare for the worst, but refusing to accept Victor's narrative that she was a co-conspirator in his cruelty, drawing a sharp line between survival and ambition. And when she looks directly at Victor and says that loving him taught her strength, but staying with him taught her fear, the courtroom falls silent, because for the first time Victor is not controlling the story, Nikki is. Victor listens, his face unreadable, but inside him something shifts irrevocably, because he realizes that no amount of evidence can erase the emotional truth Nikki is speaking, and that in exposing her secrets, he may have finally freed her from him, a realization that leaves him victorious in name only. And as the judge adjourns once again to review the mounting evidence on both sides, the outcome of the divorce remains uncertain, but one thing is clear: the fainting spell that shocked the courtroom was not Nikki's breaking point, it was her awakening. And whatever verdict ultimately comes down, the Nikki who collapsed on that marble floor will not be the Nikki who walks away, because in Genoa City, survival often looks like defeat until the moment it becomes power, and this time, Nikki Newman may be the one who finally redefines the rules of the game. In the tense days that follow Nikki's powerful testimony, Genoa City exists in a state of collective suspension, as though everyone senses that the Newman divorce is no longer merely a legal proceeding but a cultural earthquake whose final tremor has yet to land, because the silence left by the judge's adjournment is filled with speculation, fear, and strategic maneuvering, and Victor, for perhaps the first time in his life, finds himself unable to calculate the next move with certainty, since every path forward seems to lead not to victory, but to irreversible loss. Victor retreats to the ranch, the sprawling estate suddenly feeling less like a fortress and more like a mausoleum of memories, each room echoing with Nikki's laughter, her rage, her forgiveness, and her resilience, and as he pours himself a drink he barely touches, he stares out across the land he once believed symbolized his unshakable empire, now realizing that for all his acquisitions and conquests, he may have utterly failed at the one partnership that ever truly mattered, because Nikki was never just his wife. She was his mirror, his conscience, and his anchor, and without her presence the power he worshipped feels strangely hollow. Meanwhile, Nikki begins a quiet transformation that surprises even those closest to her, because instead of retreating into recovery and privacy, she starts taking control of her narrative in deliberate, measured ways, agreeing to a carefully framed interview in which she refuses to vilify Victor or sanctify herself, speaking instead about the complexity of loving a powerful man, about how fear can coexist with devotion, and about the courage it takes to finally choose oneself after a lifetime of compromise. And the public response is seismic, with many seeing in Nikki not a schemer or a victim but a woman who survived an emotional war and emerged with her humanity intact, shifting public sympathy in ways Victor's legal team never anticipated. Within the Newman family, lines continue to shift, as Nick becomes Nikki's fiercest protector, attending every medical appointment and court preparation, his anger toward Victor now tempered by a grim resolve to ensure his mother is never again pushed to the brink, while Victoria struggles privately with guilt, haunted by the realization that her relentless pursuit of power mirrors both her parents' worst instincts, forcing her to confront whether she is destined to repeat their mistakes or brave enough to break the cycle. And Adam, ever the outsider, watches these dynamics with quiet intensity, recognizing that Nikki's awakening could destabilize Victor's grip on the family in ways no enemy ever has, a thought that both unsettles and intrigues him. As the court prepares to reconvene for what could be the final ruling, a last-minute revelation threatens to detonate everything once more, because evidence surfaces suggesting that the safety deposit box containing Nikki's letter was accessed months before Victor claims to have discovered it, raising explosive questions about whether the timing of its reveal was manipulated to maximize emotional damage. And when Nikki's attorney presents this finding, the courtroom once again erupts, as Victor is forced to confront allegations that he orchestrated the moment of exposure with chilling precision, a strategy that, if proven, could not only cost him the case, but irreparably tarnish his legacy. When Victor takes the stand in response, the atmosphere is suffocating, because this is not the confident titan Genoa City expects, but a man visibly weighed down by regret and defiance in equal measure, and as he speaks, he admits that he chose the moment to reveal the letter deliberately, believing that truth delivered softly would be ignored, while truth delivered forcefully would finally end the war of narratives between him and Nikki, a confession that sends a ripple through the room, because it confirms what many have long suspected, that Victor equates control with honesty, even when that control inflicts profound harm. Nikki listens without interruption, her expression calm but resolute, and when given the opportunity to respond, she does not lash out or seek vengeance, instead stating quietly that Victor's greatest tragedy is not his cruelty, but his inability to trust love without domination, words that land with devastating clarity and leave Victor visibly shaken. Because in that moment he realizes that Nikki is no longer fighting him, she has moved beyond him, and that realization is the true defeat he never saw coming. As the judge retires to deliver a final ruling, the tension in the courtroom is nearly unbearable, and when the decision is announced, granting the divorce, dividing the assets equitably, and issuing a stern rebuke of both parties' manipulative conduct, The outcome feels almost secondary to the emotional finality settling over the room, because regardless of legal wins or losses, a chapter spanning decades is closed. And when Nikki and Victor exchange one last look, it is filled not with hatred, but with a quiet, aching acknowledgement of everything they were and everything they could never be again. Outside the courthouse, as Nikki steps into the sunlight flanked by her children, there is no collapse this time, no trembling or fear, only a woman standing firmly in her own strength, while Victor watches from a distance, alone despite the crowd, finally understanding that power cannot compel love, nor evidence erase pain, and as Genoa City buzzes with the aftermath of the most shocking divorce in its history, one truth resonates above all others. Nikki's fainting spell was not the moment she fell. It was the moment she rose, and in doing so, she forever changed the balance of power in the young and the restless.